Success didn't come easy for Dorian Wells. As the founder of Wells Realty Group, a multi-million-dollar real estate empire, he built his company from the ground up. But after years of expansion, whispers of corruption and mismanagement within his own firm reached his ears. Agents overcharging clients, neglecting properties, cutting corners on repairs. If the rumors were true, everything he stood for was at risk. So he made a drastic decision. Dorian went undercover. Disguised as an entry-level employee, he walked through the doors of his own company, prepared to see the truth for himself. And what he discovered? Worse than he could have ever imagined. The next day, he called an emergency meeting, and every last employee walked out with a termination letter. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss a story. Dorian adjusted the worn-out blazer he picked up from a thrift store that morning. His usual designer suits were replaced with a wrinkled button-up and khakis that had seen better days. He needed to look the part. A desperate job seeker trying to break into real estate. The Wells Realty Group headquarters stood tall in downtown Birmingham, Alabama. The glass doors shimmered under the hot southern sun, reflecting the kind of success he had worked years to build. But as he stepped inside, something felt off. The receptionist, a young woman chewing gum obnoxiously, barely glanced at him. "Yeah?" she said, still focused on her phone. "I'm here for a job interview," he said, his voice steady. She rolled her eyes and jerked her head toward the waiting area. "Sit. Somebody'll get you when they feel like it." Dorian clenched his jaw. Strike one. 45 minutes later. A man in an ill-fitting gray suit finally strolled up, notepad in one hand, a half-eaten sandwich in the other. "You the guy for the junior property manager position?" he asked, through a mouthful of food. Dorian nodded. "That's right. Name's D." He stopped himself just in time. "Don Williams." The man scoffed. "Right. Follow me." They walked through the office, and Dorian saw it immediately. The toxic culture. Employees were laughing loudly, scrolling on their phones, some even watching videos at full volume. No one seemed to be working. Desks were cluttered, phones rang unanswered, and an entire stack of rental applications sat untouched on a desk labeled urgent. His guide, who never bothered to introduce himself, led him to a cramped room. "Look, this ain't Harvard. We just need someone who can keep tenants in check." "Think you can do that?" Dorian kept his expression neutral. "Can you clarify?" The man smirked. "Tenants get too many rights these days. Your job? Make sure they don't get any ideas about complaining. If a property has issues, just tell them to deal with it." Dorian felt his stomach tighten. Strike two. And he was just getting started. Dorian forced himself to nod, keeping his expression blank. He had built Wells Realty Group on principles of fairness and quality service. And yet, here was a manager outright telling him to ignore tenant concerns. The man leaned back in his chair, taking another bite of his sandwich. "We got a few properties under your jurisdiction if we hire you," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Most of them are in low-income areas. Those folks don't expect much, so don't waste time with repairs. Just collect rent and move on." Dorian kept his voice calm. "What if the property has serious issues? Like mold? Leaks?" The man actually laughed. "Mold? Come on, man, you new to this? These people don't know the difference between a little mildew and a real problem. If they call, just give them some generic excuse until they stop bothering you." Dorian's hands curled into fists under the table. Strike three. And they were only 15 minutes in. 2 hours later, after the interview, Dorian was told to follow a senior property manager, Ray Holt, on a routine check of rental units. Ray was a loud, heavy-set man who treated the tenants like they were beneath him. At the first property, a run-down apartment complex, a tenant approached them hesitantly. She was an older black woman, her hands wringing nervously. "Excuse me, sir," she said, eyes flicking to Dorian, then to Ray. "The air conditioning still isn't fixed. I've been calling for 2 months." Ray sighed dramatically, rubbing his forehead like she was wasting his time. "Ma'am, we're waiting on parts." "That's what y'all said last month," she said, her voice shaking. "It's 96 degrees out and I got asthma. Can't y'all at least?" Ray cut her off with a chuckle. "Look, lady, you can either wait or leave. Ain't nobody forcing you to stay here." Dorian's stomach churned. This was one of his buildings. His company. And they were treating tenants like trash. When they walked away, Ray elbowed Dorian with a smirk. "See what I mean? Always complaining. They'll be fine." Dorian didn't respond, but in his mind, his decision was made. 3 hours later, Dorian spent the rest of the day observing, and what he saw was worse than he ever expected. Employees taking bribes to approve rent cut applications, overcharging Black and Hispanic tenants while giving white tenants discounts, falsifying maintenance reports to avoid doing repairs, ignoring tenant complaints and threatening eviction if they pushed too hard. By the time Dorian left the office, his blood was boiling. He had seen enough. Tomorrow, they were all gone. Dorian barely slept that night. Everything he had witnessed played on a loop in his mind: the blatant corruption, the inhumane treatment of tenants, the sheer disrespect for the values he built his company on. By sunrise, he was ready. Dressed in his usual tailored navy blue suit, he stepped into his private office on the top floor of Wells Realty Group. Today, he wasn't Don Williams, the rookie property manager. Today, he was Dorian Wells, the CEO, and every corrupt employee was about to find out. 9 a.m. The conference room buzzed with confusion. Employees shuffled in, some clutching coffee, others still half asleep. They weren't used to early morning meetings, especially not without warning. Ray Holt slumped into a chair, muttering, "What's this about? Ain't got time for pointless meetings." The receptionist, still chewing gum, scrolled on her phone. The hiring manager, the one who interviewed Don Williams, leaned over and whispered to a coworker, "Hope they're finally announcing bonuses." Dorian let them murmur for a moment before he stepped inside. The room went dead silent. Ray blinked. Mr. Wells?" Dorian scanned the room, his face unreadable. "Surprised to see me?" The employees exchanged nervous glances. Dorian placed his hands on the table and leaned forward. "Let me make this clear," he said, his voice ice cold. "I know everything." A ripple of unease spread through the room. "I know about the bribes," he continued. "I know about the discrimination. I know about the ignored maintenance requests, the falsified reports, the tenants you mocked behind closed doors." A few employees shifted in their seats, eyes darting toward the exits. Dorian straightened. "You all thought you could get away with it. You thought I was too far removed to notice." His voice hardened. "Well, I went undercover, and what I saw disgusted me." Ray cleared his throat, forcing a nervous chuckle. "Sir, I think there's a misunderstanding." Dorian cut him off. "The only misunderstanding is that you thought you could run my company into the ground while I wasn't looking." Ray's face drained of color. Dorian took a deep breath, then dropped the final hammer. "Every single one of you is fired." A collective gasp filled the room. "Whoa! What?" the receptionist stammered. "All of us?" Dorian nodded. "Every last one of you. Effective immediately." The room erupted. "You can't do this! This isn't fair! I've been here for 5 years!" Dorian raised a hand, silencing them. "What's unfair," he said, his voice dangerously low, "is making elderly tenants suffer in 90-degree heat." His gaze locked onto Ray. "What's unfair is treating people like second-class citizens because of the color of their skin." He turned to the hiring manager. "What's unfair is lying to tenants, overcharging them, and pocketing money that doesn't belong to you." No one had anything to say. Dorian gestured to the door. "Security will escort you out. Get your things and go." 10 a.m. Within the hour, every corrupt employee was gone. Dorian sat in his office, staring out over the city. Wells Realty Group had nearly crumbled under greed and negligence. Not anymore. A knock at the door. His longtime assistant, Miriam, one of the few people he still trusted, stepped inside. "They're all gone," she said softly. "What's next?" Dorian exhaled. "We rebuild." Dorian sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The rot had been cut out, but now came the hard part: rebuilding. Wells Realty Group couldn't function without a team, and the tenants who had been mistreated for months, years even, deserved better. Miriam, his trusted assistant, stood patiently. "Where do we start?" Dorian tapped his fingers on the desk. "We bring in people who actually care. And we start with the tenants." Miriam nodded. "I can arrange meetings at each property. Let the residents voice their concerns directly." "Good," Dorian said. Make the first meeting this afternoon. She hesitated. You know some tenants might not trust you, right? After everything those managers put them through? Dorian's jaw tightened. Then I'll prove to them I'm different. 3 p.m. Dorian arrived at Maplewood Estates, one of the company's older apartment complexes. The air was thick with humidity, and the cracked pavement in the parking lot was just another reminder of the neglect he had allowed to fester under his watch. A group of tenants gathered in the courtyard, their faces filled with skepticism. An older woman, the same one who had begged Ray Holt for air conditioning, crossed her arms. Didn't expect to see you here, Mr. CEO, she said bluntly. Dorian met her gaze head-on. I wouldn't expect you to trust me, not after what you've been through. A few people murmured in agreement. But I came here to listen, he continued. I can't change the past, but I can make things right moving forward. A younger man scoffed. And how do we know that? Y'all been taking our money and treating us like dirt for years. Dorian nodded. You don't know that, not yet. But I'm here and I'm listening. The tenants exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they started talking. Broken plumbing, mold, rent hikes with no explanation, ignored maintenance requests, the constant fear of eviction if they spoke up. Dorian took every word in, jotting down notes, asking follow-up questions. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself. And by the time the meeting ended, he saw it, the first glimmer of trust in their eyes. 1 week later, Dorian worked tirelessly over the next week. New property managers were hired, ones with a proven record of fairness and integrity. Emergency maintenance crews were dispatched to every neglected property. New policies were rolled out. Tenants would have direct access to a hotline for complaints, bypassing any future bad managers. A rent adjustment audit began, ensuring no one was being unfairly overcharged. By the end of the week, Miriam handed Dorian a stack of tenant feedback reports. She smiled. The difference is already showing. Dorian scanned the papers. For the first time in months, tenants had hope. And so did he. 3 months later. The changes didn't happen overnight. But 3 months later, Wells Realty Group was unrecognizable. The new hires, handpicked by Dorian himself, treated tenants with respect. Complaints were actually addressed. Repairs were no longer ignored. One afternoon, Dorian returned to Maplewood Estates for a follow-up visit. The older woman from before greeted him at the front steps. This time, instead of skepticism, there was something else in her eyes. Relief. You actually did what you said, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. Dorian smiled. Told you I came to listen. She gave him a long look, then nodded. Then maybe, she said, you ain't like the rest of 'em after all. For the first time since this ordeal began, Dorian truly felt like he had done something right. And this time, he wasn't going to take his eyes off his company again. Dorian thought his business was thriving, but beneath the surface, it was rotting from within. This story is a powerful reminder that true leadership requires vigilance, accountability, and integrity. When you turn a blind eye to wrongdoing, corruption will flourish, but when you take action, real change happens. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications to be the first to know when the next story drops.